And we have, Chris is on the line as well.
Chris is on, good, because I have a question for him, but I will ask him at the appropriate time. First, I will call the meeting to order. This is the February 9th meeting of the Sagaponic Village Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'd like you to join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and the members of the board had an opportunity to review the minutes of last month's meeting.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve. Unless
Okay,
there's changes.
no, does anybody have any changes? Merrily has made a motion to adopt them. I'll second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the minutes have been adopted. We will now return to the first item of old business, and this is where I have a question for Chris. Chris, the applicant, recognizing that they had a case of overreach, shall we say, saw fit to withdraw the application. They've sent us a formal letter, in fact, withdrawing their application in the expectation of submitting a new reduced one. I know that after we've rendered a decision, they can't withdraw the application. We have closed the meeting on that application, but we have not rendered a decision. Do they need our consent to withdraw, or can they withdraw on their own initiative?
They can withdraw right up until we issue a decision, render a decision.
Okay, so then we'll let the record reflect that the applicant has voluntarily withdrawn the application of Norman and Jane Alpert pertaining to 239 Hedges Lane. That was application 1 of 2024. And we do understand that they will be submitting a new application, but it was not in time for this meeting and apparently will not be in time for the March meeting. So we will move on to item number 2 of our old business, which is Peter Ozerski, 2005 Revocable Trust. This is application 2, 2024, and it pertains to 871 Sag Main Street. We heard and saw the application last month, which is an effort to preserve as much of an existing farm in Sagaponic as possible, while frankly approximately doubling the size of the primary residence, which for modern living purposes is somewhat inadequate at this point, and still being under the GFA that would be permitted for a principal dwelling, but exceeding the permitted amount because of the extraordinary amount of accessory structures. And as members of the board may recall, we were questioning what they had offered to remove portions of the accessory dwellings to mitigate the increase in gross GFA. But there were questions as to what the Architectural Historic Review Board would permit. In the interim, they appeared before the AHRB, and I will leave the rest up to you to present the results of that meeting and what your intentions now are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Val Florio. I'm the architect for the applicant. And at this board's request, we attended the Architectural Review Board session just recently with the same proposal which was put before this board, and with the intent to seek some feedback in terms of their general acceptance of what we were proposing, and if they had any cares or concerns. The outcome of that meeting was that there appeared to be unanimous support and approval for our project, to the point where the chairman, as requested, the chairman of the ARB board has written your board a letter indicating that all members were in general agreement that this is a favorable project in our opinion. With those findings having been presented to you, I don't have much to add to my previous presentation other than to answer any cares or concerns that you may have at this point.
Okay, so basically, based upon the HRB, and I assume that you've read the excerpt that we were provided from that meeting, you wish to go forward with the same proposal that we had already heard, which had the removal, which I'd like to get refreshed on, but I did have a few questions. You refer, Val, in your presentation that the addition with the breezeway in between, the separation of the two, is something that is favored by the Secretary of the Interior.
That's correct.
All right, do you have some document? I'm curious about what exactly they say, what they propose, and what they, how that comes about. Is that embodied in some regulations?
It is. I'm a former long-term ARB member in a historic district of Sag Harbor, and we abide by the Secretary of Interior guidelines, which is posted on the New York State website. So if any municipality with a historic district would refer to those Secretary of State guidelines, the intent of the separation is to help create a distinction between what's historic and what's proposed. They discourage a combination of the massing of the two structures should have that break in between. And in many cases, some folks tend to go modern with the addition. We've seen some of that where it's a very far departure. And in this case, we don't want that. If we could marry the buildings because the textures, the colors, and materials are all consistent with the original farmhouse, but I'm going by the guidelines of that as a former member, but also an architect who understands preservation. So to answer your question.
So the intent is not to compromise the original historic structure, to do something which is compatible, but is intentionally identifiable as not part of the original structure and separated. And that's what your addition appears to do. And the breezeway is, of course, conditioned, so it's still a single structure.
Correct. Now, with the sensitivity which has been taken in creating the breezeway contributes to square footage, but it's part of the a sort of prescribed approach to historic preservation. And excuse me. That being said, the architecture with this, in the architectural world, we call it additive style architecture. So if you, for example, would see a farmhouse, you could see an addition and then another addition, and you can sort of track time progression of these houses. They're very whimsical.
We see some of those in the village here.
So, correct. And so you may have a quirky looking shape because they decided, well, we need to roof this structure. And so there's an intermingling of different architectural, massing, if you would call it that. This, I feel, is a clean addition. The Secretary of State, can I approach the?
Sure, please do.
If this is still audible for you recording, but the guideline is such that when you do an addition to a historic structure, that you subordinate the addition. And the intent is to let the primary building stand proud and be very obvious that this is the residence and here's the add-on.
Yeah. So the dominant structure remains this historic structure, and this is subordinate to it and identifiably as separate. It does present as two structures, more or less.
Well, so that's the most advantageous view to understand the point you're making. But if you look at the home from straight on, actually, I wouldn't say that I would actually reverse my impression of it, which is the addition, because it runs laterally, seems actually, when it goes around.
Can you put switch the screen? Yeah.
Keep going to the
From the
front
street
side,
side.
street view.
Yeah,
the view to the east.
that I was trying to get us to.
From the front.
Which is how most people will see the house, right, coming past like,
Unless you have sufficient depth that you can identify it could be an outbuilding, for example, of the farm, because it's behind the main dwelling. Even though I take your point about it
it's just
sticking out to the
substantial, it's
side.
just, it's obviously a large dwelling.
There will be trees here, and I had made a comment.
About purposely not exterior.
To not, yeah, a lot of
Right
presentations.
now, there's a fence, right, there's a high fence.
There's a fence, yeah, and there's a pool, and there's a larger pool
Yeah.
in the back, which we're removing and decreasing, but many times I've personally seen this where the presentation is done in such a manner that it has lots of trees and bushes, and
Yeah.
literally it's like a magic act. Like I could have put a tree
Yeah.
here and you'd be like, oh, I don't see anything. I want you to see it exactly as it's being constructed. There will be trees here, and the intent is, you know, I'm being very forthright with the board, so that will be screened.
I agree with what you just said about like, don't put the tree, like, that's like fluff. But I think what would be helpful, this is, whatever, I'm not having an issue with this, I want to sound like that.
that's right.
But is if you even could understand where the profit, like, where, like, what you don't understand about this is the actual proximity of the property line. So like, if this was my only, I mean, obviously we have
Yeah.
all these lovely surveys so that we can see it. But I sometimes wonder when we get the visual, why we don't get the idea of like the constricted, what the real constraints of the
It might have
lot
been
are.
useful to see the actual.
Property line.
Against.
I'm very
the
familiar with the
projections.
house.
No, I know that, I'm saying, but to see side by side.
Right, like where you see like
What it
there's
would
actually,
actually appear like as opposed to the, I appreciate what you've done in stripping the foliage so that we can really see what the structure is. And in fact, it does present, you know, one of the things you just said was that the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines suggest that the historic structure should be clearly the dominant structure and the addition being subordinate. That doesn't quite show that way in the presentation, frankly. I mean, this is an addition, I guess it's 3 bedrooms, but it appears virtually the size of the original structure, so, you know.
except it's further back.
The shielding, the screening with foliage is certainly gonna help that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
like. I think I wasn't clear about what I was saying before, and it doesn't necessarily,
No.
it's no weight on.
Yeah.
I'm just talking in general, when, like, about, that's a house lot, right? So the way that we see it on there is sort of this vast open space. As opposed to like, and I understand why you don't wanna have trees and such in front of the house for this presentation, but so that when we're looking at it, just like when we look at plans here, I don't know if it can be done on a computer, you get the idea of the constraint of the house lot, like where that actually ends on
Better
either side.
scale, basically.
Yeah.
And where the houses are next
Right,
to it.
Right, so you'd see traveling the length of the property, sort of 2 lines that just sort of show like this is the property line, that's all I'm saying.
If this video could progress just a little bit further. It ends with a view with the roadside elevation. Because what happens is, I guess it's towards the very end, the house is situated up on a higher elevation. And so as this is behind it, it's difficult. This portion of the addition, which we're trying to keep to the north, it's discreet. And from the roadside, this primary gable is what will appear. And again, we will have plantings, the parking court will be screened with hedges. And a lot of this, it'll just read as it's always been, you know, the historic farmhouse. So.
I'm sure the architectural, but you will lose the longest view of the furthest barn, right? Through that, like if you're just on the road.
I
looking
studied
straight
that.
through.
It's interesting because the cemetery is right there in front of the house. And the primary traffic is more on Sac Main Street.
Mhm.
So it's difficult to even see any of the buildings in the back. You only get a real read of the house.
If you're, oh yeah.
And it's up higher, so I had mentioned that during one of the presentations, we went to preempt the FAR request by reducing the barn in the back. It can't even be seen readily from the road, but we want to keep it. So, but the video ends with just, you see the front, and I get your point though, it should have had the road here and the hedges.
I'm not sure what's happening with
It's
this.
okay, but, thank you.
Just want to make one comment. I just was there just before looking at it, and I couldn't see the structure, the back structure from the front now.
Use that barn.
Right, I actually had to drive all the way around to walk that property.
I think it's because I walk,
Yeah,
I see it walking.
Yeah.
And I've seen
so
it,
there, from the driveway, you cannot at all see. it.
because the fence is there now.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you're
Exactly.
walking like past Hearthstone, I'm probably familiar with it, just like based on my long-term
This is the
memory as
topic,
opposed to
this
what's
is the
really
old toxic
there.
farm,
Yeah,
right? Yes,
yeah.
okay.
But the barn, so if you, when you see the thing turning, I'm talking about the one way in the back,
Yeah.
which I believe is not even a historic barn, right? Is that the one where the squash court is?
No one has been able to identify which is the historic barn.
Right.
But presumably, the way it was written, it said the barn to the east, which is what we call the squash ball court barn. It's lost some of its
It's original character,
Agricultural-
but it
That
has
was
those
the
large, it
contributing
has those
structure,
sort
but
of
that's been renovated.
like incredibly long, tall, white doors on it.
it
Or is
has-
that one that's
it has
closer?
skylights. There's a garage barn.
No,
which
you're
is
right, it has a big long door on it, but there's no windows in there in the front at all.
No, there, but
It's
yeah, but
just
it's the
doors.
one with the big long doors that is, but to me, that sort of like speaks farm, but that doesn't matter, it's not a
It's the
farm.
one past it.
Yeah.
Which is the one to the furthest.
Yeah, the furthest from,
east.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
So, but they do park cars in the center barn. And we would like to keep it, but reduce it, so
That's
it
good.
still has, yeah.
Garage that had the wing, the wings being
yeah,
removed, the
yeah.
garage
The-
being
the-
retained.
the barn.
Yes.
And the architecture on the,
Yeah.
Which you see.
what we call the garage barn
Yeah, 'cause
is
it's
somewhat
out.
quirky.
Yeah.
We think that it's just a hodgepodge of additions that were placed on that barn at some time. But it was used for repair. It's farm trucks, whatever, pulled into that structure. It's an oversized garage.
Yeah, that's constructive. I think that the keeping the garage, which is also not directly in the sight line of the barn behind, removes that. Okay, so that, I appreciate that. That was one question. But so, going back to my original point, if I wanted to see the Secretary of the Interior guidelines, just to see the actual text, that's available, you said, on the New York State website?
Correct.
Have you seen that before? Have you?
You know, I've never actually gone and looked at the guidelines. I'm aware that they exist, and I've sort of taken the word for people when they tell me what they say. And I'm not doubting you here either, and what you say makes perfect sense. And we have had other properties that have very successfully built additions, which sometimes are in direct contrast, modern, to the historic, and sometimes blend with the historic, with the separation. And I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's a good thing to do.
I might add that what I really enjoy about the inspector's code interpretation, years back, there was a historic house on Strong's, I'm not sure what, Strong's, and
Marswich and Townwood.
the house was diminutive, so potential GFA was something like 5,000 square feet.
He was an
Right.
architect too, the owner of that property, isn't he?
That was a Michael Friend project.
Oh,
Right,
Yes.
but I had presented to the ARB board an addition which was removed from the house and connected by means of a below-ground tunnel, living space to living space. And that was a huge win in terms of the preservation aspect, because we didn't envelop this little house with this huge addition.
That was David Porter's property, wasn't it?
No, it was the
No.
strong
Oh, I thought it
farm.
was Porter, okay, it was.
Porter's
Strong.
down.
And
But
I
that's
believe it's
similar.
603 Town Line Road.
Yeah.
I'm John Woodsma, the building inspector, I'm sorry. But I believe it's 603 Town Line Road.
Okay, yeah. Well, there've been a number of successful ones, I think, that we've seen.
And a number of ones.
Yeah, no, you don't like the one that's behind, next to the
There's so
do,
many, there's so
right?
many.
Um,
That's okay.
if I may, I have another question. I read in the, I guess it was the presentation of the HRB or its response, there was some comment about the rear barn being useless. And I'm curious to know, there's something about it feels like sag, but it's useless, so the barn, that barn currently is empty, there's nothing in it, but it could be used as any accessory structure. Is that, you're mentioning the squash court in here, is that?
The previous owner had renovated the barn, including a new roof with many, many skylights.
Mhm.
And at that time, they made use of it with this playing or indoor playing
So
court.
it's a recreational space, but that's not the structure on the property where there had been illegal rental,
No,
right? The rental was the two small housing units to the south of the property.
there's a small structure that is comprised of two peak view. It's
Yeah.
one story in nature, and it had been advertised. I've seen the advertisements myself, as our
Housing.
building inspector has. Your cottage by the sea,
Yeah.
year round or, by the season in the summer, and it's not allowed by code, but that was ongoing. And part of our building permit application is to render that structure as wide open space, meaning no bedroom. And the intent, if we were to allow to keep that structure, is to use it as office space. My clients have 5 grown children, all in the age bracket of 25 and older. And this is potential use for a quiet home
Okay,
office.
all right, this is an important comment because my question for the rest of the board, what I wanted to discuss was in terms of whether it needs to be removed in order to further reduce the excess FAR on the property, GFA, or whether, because it's actually kind of attractive structures to allow them to remain, notwithstanding that they contribute to the overage, but to provide some covenants to assure that they not be used for residential purposes, that kind of occupancy. So does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that particular point since it's now raised? You inclined to allow the structures to remain?
Office space, yeah, because I feel like more people are needing that kind of space, especially.
Yeah, no, I think that,
Wait, so
can you put it,
I want
What
to
I'm-
just
what I'm
reiterate,
saying-
make sure what you're saying is that, so because of all the accessory structures, the including the addition to the principal dwelling, we get over FAR.
Correct.
And so are we going to advocate for removing, since they don't want to remove any of the principal structure space, they'd rather, or the result of us saying that we don't want that much overage will mean removing some of the.
Well, they've
Perhaps that's
carefully, as Val indicated, they preemptively already removed a number of the accessory structures to try to mitigate the effect of increasing the principal dwelling, thereby creating this excess of the overall
Right.
FAR. And I'm saying they're still well over the permitted FAR, gross FAR. And does anybody have a feeling that there should be a further removal to reduce that? Obviously, they prefer to retain the structures because they continue to show them on the site. And the reason I even mention it is because if you're removing structures, they want to move this structure up here to be a pool house. That has a specific use as a pool cabana.
But then
And
the
this has a
refusal-
specific use as a garage. This is a large recreational space, which perhaps could be reduced further. However, that it's some sort of a recreational space that presumably they want to not destroy the integrity of the nature of the structure, even though it's reduced. You can only reduce it so much without making it ridiculous. So that would leave this structure. I'm saying it contributes to the property and the overall feel of a farm with a number of outbuildings. So I'm not advocating to remove it. I'm just suggesting that we are granting a variance for substantial overage of square footage. One solution would be to ask them to remove additional structures, either that or something else, to further reduce the FAR. But if not that, then because of the prior, and I'm not suggesting the current owner has any intention of doing it, and Val has been illuminating, as has Mr. Ozerski, as the intentions of using it as an office, that nonetheless, just because they may not continue to own the property forever, that maybe in connection with the granting of the variance, there should be a covenant that it will not be used as no sleeping or cooking, something, wherever our Chris can go, the typical language that we provide for this kind of accessory structure. So is that amenable, you think? Or do you have comments on that?
I guess my thought would be, throw it back to you, Val, if we did want to reduce the overall FAR as a matter of the variance approval, what would you all be proposing? So to the chairman's comment here, if that is going to be entertained, what would we do to reduce the FAR?
Well, how much is the garage being reduced right now? The garage is pretty
Picture of it is
significant.
pretty big.
They've knocked-
It's-
Pretty big
Knocked
space.
off all but what's essential to have the three-car
It's a
garage.
it's a big structure, so they're knocking that down, that's
No,
a
it's-
Quite a bit.
significant amount.
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a number on here. I mean, the plan shows how much has been reduced.
And
But
it
I'm
looks-
saying, but I don't think you can reduce the garage any
I
further.
think the beauty of buying an old farm is that there will be these kind of uniquely placed and sized buildings throughout it. It's one of the things that probably makes the property attractive to
The
people.
character, sure.
I think, I personally don't have a hard time with keeping it intact. However, to Elliot's point about how it's used, well, we have code to how it's used. But you're saying putting something
He's saying-
additional in our decision, making that, so going.
We've often done that when we've preserved historic structures and we've allowed people to have excess FAR. We've conditioned it upon covenants that there will not be, just to reinforce the uniqueness of our allowing the excess FAR. It's not something that people should come in and expect. There's a specific reason
Right.
for it and protect it.
It makes all the sense in the world, and also protects it if for some reason.
Yeah, if the
you
property
know,
got
was
sold.
sold,
Yeah.
which happens all the time,
Yeah.
sometimes. So at least
He's gonna live there the rest of his
since
life.
there was previously an illegal sublet before, or illegal cottage, this kind of prevents it, and
Yeah.
reinforces it, plus gives the excuse for the overage. I think it's.
And without
perfect.
requiring them to remove the structure, they're gonna open the space, so it probably wouldn't be usable for now. But obviously, that would be reversible if there were a new owner. So you wouldn't have any objection to such a covenant, that it not be used as habitable space for that purpose. You'd be allowed to use it for an office, of course, but no sleeping, no cooking, basically.
It's kind of a quaint structure, quite
Yeah,
frankly. It
yeah.
fits in with the property, like you said, Marilyn, it's kind of nice.
All right, well, I lean into that point of view as well. I'm just pointing out that,
There were other members of our board who aren't currently here today, though, who felt very differently than I.
yeah, absolutely. Richard.
Answer my question.
I mean, I'm not trying to draw this out, I wanna leave
No,
too.
no, no, it's okay.
But when we preclude being able to sleep somewhere, we could put a tent up in your backyard, why couldn't they sleep in there?
Because it would be a habitable residential structure in excess FAR. A tent is an FAR, temporary structure. It's not, we're not granting a variance for additional
Bedrooms,
permanent space on the premises.
bedrooms.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's relatively harmless.
I just like going back, like, oh, well, COVID days, like you needed
Well,
a separate
look,
structure to put your
nobody's
kids in.
gonna be sneaking, no one is gonna be sneaking around the property with a flashlight to see if someone's sleeping. But, and.
With that
and it
big
would-
family, I'd wanna sleep somewhere else.
Well, it would not seem to be a detriment to the applicant if the intent is to use it for an office. And knowing that ownership of property is not permanent and it does change hands and people take advantage of situations. And even though we have granted additional FAR, people have taken advantage of us with areas above garages that are supposed to be uninhabitable, which turn out then to be a bedroom and a bathroom. And then one owner sort of came forth and said, I bought the property, it had an illegal bedroom and bathroom over the garage, and we removed it. And now I'm back here to apply for a variance to permit its reinstallation. Well, that was kind of, that was delightful that somebody actually complied with the law and asked permission rather than getting away with something and then maybe having to ask forgiveness. I just,
The only thing I just want to say, just because.
okay, just introduce
I'm
yourself,
Peter Ozuski,
the owner of the property.
yeah, through a trust that I don't entirely understand. I would just say offices, it's 3 little rooms.
Yeah,
We got 5 kids who
Yeah.
are all in jobs where they can work from home.
Yeah.
I'd like to get them out as often as possible. So I'd like to, if I could, have them still be the 3 little rooms, so we put
no, I have no problem with
one
that.
kid with their computer in each room.
I don't think we're suggesting that you have to clear the interior to a single room. You can have separate rooms, they can be separate offices, they can be used for any or all of your children as well as yourself or grandchildren.
Right.
But there's no sleeping or cooking in the premises. Fair enough?
Understood.
Okay.
Before we leave that, I just want, just for the record, I asked a question.
Yeah.
If we were going to ask for a
Oh, yes,
reduction in
sorry.
FAR, what would you all be proposing? And I think we touched a little bit on this at the
We
last
did.
meeting.
This is an interesting question because what I present before you is to some degree a request for allowing accessory FAR. Now, if we point that question back to the house FAR, which is quite valuable, we're allowed a little over 7,200 square feet for the house. And we were below that. It's in the, I believe it's like 6,898 or something. Part of that is being increased because of the breezeway portion. And so I have done my best to tell my client, please let's do our make a sincere effort to keep this scale low. So that it's not a big request. Obviously, we've done that, but if I had to take more from the house, it would come from the breezeway portion. I don't see that it serves a huge purpose to do that, especially when we're taking thousands of square feet out of the accessory. So we've made an effort to come to you with a reduction on both primary and accessory.
Jay, I didn't think that you were asking about removing FAR from the main.
No,
dwelling.
yeah.
And yeah, I think it was just on the overall, so additional reduction of the accessory space. If there were any place that it could come off relatively painlessly, but I think we've discussed that at this point. The cabana, I had mentioned it last time, it's not a big deal for me, but I was just curious, I had asked why it remained so close to that northerly property line. It's no longer adjacent to the Milliken home or the home to the across the property line there. And we haven't received any letters from anybody about this, right? So no one's objecting, and it is screened and it is no longer adjacent to the other property. Does anybody have any problem with allowing that cabana to remain at that on the side, because that's another variance we're granting, right?
If I might add, Mr. Chairman, in 1972, that structure was given a variance due to a lot line modification in which the existing barn, of which there were many, it just so happened that it was in close proximity. We're making the condition a little bit better. It's important to us, the location, because as you had mentioned, Mary Lee, that the
alignment.
addition, as if we were to push that further to the side, the pool would go with it, and then the addition starts to present itself a little bit more. We're doing our best to keep that behind the facade of the house from the street. So Is it an infraction? Yes, but it's less of an infraction in the newer location by Vivian Fur too.
I don't recall in the application, are we asked for a variance for that, or it's already grandfathered because of where it was previously located?
We have listed it as.
It is a variance.
A variance.
Okay, that's the reason I'm mentioning it,
That's right.
because it will be included in our decision,
Correct.
and we do need to grant a variance for that structure.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to confirm that nobody has any objection to its location where it could have been moved away from it, which you've explained why you haven't done that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, the only other question I had is that the cottages, or what's now to become a studio or the offices, it's shown as, on your plan as existing to be rendered a studio. Of course, in the text, it's characterized as agricultural housing, right? That was the agricultural housing, or was it?
It was that's how it used to be.
Yeah, okay, so it will no longer be agricultural housing, of course, right, all right. I had no further questions, anybody else? Anybody else?
No, I'm sorry, I had to step away for one moment.
Yeah.
For a family call. You were mentioning, I believe, talking about the studio, keeping it as an office space with individual rooms.
Yes.
Yeah, like the rooms.
So if it comes to me where it appears that these rooms could be potential sleeping areas with closed doors, we don't allow for that in accessory structures.
Then you must have been out of the room when I said that as a grant of this variance, we will have a covenant that that structure may not have cooking or sleeping facilities, specifically.
So an individual room with a closet, I would construe as a potential sleeping area.
No
Well,
closets.
So wait a minute,
Closets.
so John, you're objecting to the physical configuration or the
Yes.
potential use of that?
I go by the walk like a duck's, quack like a duck's theory. If it looks like a bedroom, I'm gonna call it a bedroom.
All right, so then perhaps, Peter, I misstated when I said you could leave the separate room configurations as long as you were subject to the covenant that it would not be misused. Our building inspector is saying that that configuration in and of itself is unacceptable because it would permit the improper use. So how do we solve that problem?
I
If you take away the closets and leave the partition?
And it can't be.
I've consulted with the chief inspector.
Yeah,
And the drawings which are submitted before you.
yeah,
Reflect that request to make it open space.
Yeah.
In terms of rendering it a wide open room
yeah.
versus rooms which can be potentially used as bedrooms.
Yes.
That would
So,
satisfy,
yeah, just to be, we don't need closets. If we could have,
Fine.
I'd like to have doors, just so that,
Yes.
because the three kids on three different Zooms.
doors or partitions. What you said is leaving an open space satisfies the building inspector's objection, but doesn't satisfy Mr. Ozerski's need.
I think it's open space within each room, it's fine. In other words, no.
I don't know, but he's saying that you can't have the partitions which create the separate rooms,
As long as we
which
don't-
could be used for sleeping
If they
purposes.
take away closet facilities and things that would turn it into someplace where you would habitate and put your clothes away,
Yeah.
and it's just an open office space, fine.
So it could be 3 separate open office spaces.
Yes.
That's what you're asking for.
But with doors between.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've satisfied both concerns, is that it still contains separate rooms for the privacy of 3 people using separate offices within the structure, yet not violating the building code provision that it would be similar to or usable as a sleeping room. And there will be covenants within the variance which specifically prohibits it for sleeping and cooking.
Understood.
Okay, I think, so if anybody else, comments? I think it's a very nice plan. I think it's a very reasonable accommodation from everybody, and I would take a motion to close the hearing.
I'll make a motion.
All right, second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we've closed the hearing. We will deliberate briefly, but I think you can sort of read between the lines, but we have been chastened about rendering decisions on the spot, because we need to appropriately consider all the issues. Thank you for your presentation and for your sensitive redevelopment of the site, both of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I don't know if I'm on record still. but-
Well, you're on record, but you're off the hearing, you can still
Okay,
speak.
if I may,
Yeah.
I would like to submit to the secretary the guidelines which you had inquired.
Yeah, the Secretary of the Interior guidelines?
Yes.
Sure, we
if
have
I
to
can
have that.
essentially have it. Yes. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much. Okay, I'm sorry if I dragged that out a little bit longer than you expected, but I think it's a really interesting project and it was worth us spending some time on it, particularly these last adjustments and comments. And on the record, explaining why some of these things are being granted and why it's configured the way it is. And I think that it's illuminating about the Secretary of the Interior guidelines, for example.
I'm sure Chris will have this in the decision, but I think for me, what goes a lot to like making this application possible is that they're just they are existing structures.
Mhm.
So where and I realize we've had other sort of amalgamations happen specifically on narrow lane of existing structures. It appears to me also that I was not for, I might have been on the record, but in hindsight, definitely think we made mistakes with the way that property went together. This is a larger lot with actually just more space around it. And I think that matters, that it can accommodate this.
It's also its location in the historic center of the village, even right by the cemetery. As a farm assemblage, I take your point about the additional accessory structures, even though they create more mass, they also create more of the character
Yeah,
of the
providing-
typical farm.
Right, providing it doesn't look changed radically.
Yeah.
I would personally prefer to see a much smaller addition on that
I
house.
agree,
But
but here's the thing.
we're in
so-
Sagaponic.
No, I prefer to see a smaller addition too,
Yeah.
but the code permits
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
than they're actually building. They're
Yeah.
building less than it permits. And so
Yeah.
what is the point of further requiring them to reduce that structure?
It's
To the
just a,
extent that they've done the best they can to conceal it and separate it from.
Yeah.
you know.
I think they did a really attractive job
Yeah.
and the layout is very thought out.
Mhm.
I'm just looking at that house they're building, and of course, it wasn't historic, and though it's like a mock
Yeah.
historic house. On Hedges Lane, across from the post offices, the Arkinson residence, like that place is just getting bigger and bigger, and it's like it reminds me of this a little bit, where it's just such an incredible mass, right across from the post office.
Yeah.
Right on
One
Hedges
of one
Lane.
things.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
just
I
such
know.
an incredible, I mean, of course, it's like in this bare bones state,
Oh,
but it's
right,
just
yeah.
massive. And that's what and like some of these, it's the same problem we have on the corner across from the general store, from the SAG school, is that you have this diminutive original house. And then what was
Oh.
put next, it's just like, good God, like this, it's the size of the houses they're allowed. Can't further reduce what's
Well,
allowed.
that was a small lot. You're
Okay.
talking about Fairfield Pond and Hedges. right?
That one is among, like, just.
Yeah.
But then I was also like, again, with a historic structure, there's just only so much you can do. If you wanna keep the historic structure, you have to allow for a certain amount of square footage in there. That's a garage. They didn't join it, which maybe we should consider in the future, but anyway, we'll see. We'll get another one of those. Luckily, they didn't wanna turn the original house here into a garage.
I like the fact for the record that that you're putting a covenant into the cottages and the fact that even though they're increasing the primary home, it is within the guidelines, but they also are making a pretty big concession of cutting down it's kind of a hideous garage they have there, so.
Yeah.
That's kind of a nice precedent to have in.
With a
Well,
weird
the-
layout as well.
The existing dwelling is, in my view, clearly inadequate for modern life, particularly if you have grown children and grandchildren and all. So it would be really oppressive not to allow substantial expansion of the dwelling. Nonetheless, they're keeping the size of the dwelling at less than would be permitted. And so I hate to penalize them because there are these other contributing structures on the property that help retain it as a farm scene
Yeah.
as opposed to just a big suburban dwelling. So I think we've come to a really good conclusion, and
Right.
I support.
My issue is
granting the variance.
was the illegal cottage that was there for a while. Looks like you solved the problem.
Yeah. Okay,
We hope we do.
so
Well, for the
I think,
future, hopefully.
I think though we didn't announce a decision here, I think that we can.
It was affordable. My friends
Was it?
looked at it, yeah.
Yeah.
What's affordable?
And I think that's part of the problem is that there's nothing like that that's actually, that's why I asked, like, who's sleeping? Like, just because there's literally no affordable rentals for
Well,
people here, but that's okay.
The
That's
village is
obviously the way we
considered,
wanted
right,
it.
the mother-daughter or carriage house regulations.
Nobody
or-
wants affordable housing. in Saxon.
Yeah, well, maybe mandated. You may not have a choice.
All right, let's render a decision on this particular application. So I guess I will entertain a resolution to grant the variances as requested, subject to there being a covenant restricting the use of what is now characterized as agricultural housing to office uses, which specifically exclude sleeping and cooking. And I think other than that, we didn't have any conditions, correct?
Yeah, but again, if the concern is because of the multiple buildings on this property and sleeping and cooking, why isn't it that covenant just talking about the additional accessory structures in general as opposed to just that one?
Well, technically, the code already covers that. You can't have the
Yeah.
sleeping in any of the other structures. You're not gonna be able to
Yeah.
sleep in the garage, you're not gonna be able to sleep in the barn. The cabana is a
What are
cabana.
they gonna do with
It may be overkill. The reason that I specified for this is that this had previously been used for housing, it was advertising for
And
housing.
it's
That's
listed
shown
as
here as
agricultural,
Right, and it was
housing,
agricultural housing, which now is.
And it's
limited.
fixtured as housing.
which is because it was agricultural housing when Peterson bought it too.
Right.
So like, it wasn't like, it wasn't doing anything.
But my point is, the reason for the covenant
It's
with
specific
respect
the way
to
it's
this
listed,
structure is
yeah.
because the way it's configured, the way it's been used. And just to be clear that we're allowing it to remain, but subject to that condition.
Sounds fine.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
So there's a second to that resolution, you want? to-
Second,
Do we want to first write a decision on it and then adopt the final decision for next month or? because
Yeah,
typ-
why don't you write the decision for our review and we'll.
Yeah, especially because of the covenant, the language is always,
Yeah, okay, we should see that. You're right, Chris. So we've given you the drafting instructions and we'll look at it before we actually pass a resolution adopting.
yeah.
Better. Thank you. Any other comments or should we adjourn the meeting? Entertain,
unless there's anything else.
is there anything else you want to discuss?
Do we have any applications for this?
No.
No, today.
They're
We'll
coming-
have one new one for next month.
There's a lot going on in the village right now. I don't know if it's all legal.
You do have an application for March? One?
I sent it to you.
Oh, yeah, right, okay. But certainly not Alpert, they're not back in time for that.
No,
That
no.
would be probably April.
Is that the Potato Lane one? There's a Potato Lane one coming.
I don't remember now.
You want
The
it.
Potato Lane one is not next month. Next month will be a property on
height
Sand Dune
variance?
Court.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
And which is that one for?
that is for, I believe it's 119 Sand Dune Court, it's Judge Kaplan's old house.
Oh, that's across, north of,
And that's a height
Rutland.
variance?
Yes, part of their variance is for a high crime.
And that's Bennett, right, you said?
no, that's,
Oh,
yeah.
oh, that,
No, that's
oh,
the
that's,
Potato Road.
okay, right.
And is Potato Road a height variance as well?
No,
Oh, good.
Okay.
But Judge Kaplan's house is not on stilts?
not currently.
No, that's.
It is, but it's at a much lower elevation than FEMA would ever allow right now. So this one will be elevated, they wanna put an entranceway underneath it. They're gonna need relief from 2 front yard setbacks, a rear yard setback, and accessory off-street parking. However, the front and rear yard setbacks could be handled administratively if they went to the planning board first, because they would be able to administratively reduce them to what they're asking for. None of the variances that are being asked for are obnoxious.
What about the height ones?
It's not obnoxious.
What's not obnoxious?
I'll let them present it to you.
2 or 3 feet, something like that, yeah. That's
3 feet's
within,
obnoxious.
2 or 3 feet is within the range of what we typically be granting.
Yeah, but
Obnoxious
that's
is
that,
10.
but the one that was the slant roof, that one, you know, at that
It was
edge.
only at the very
Right,
southern
right,
edge, just for a
Right,
short.
but I
distance.
guess that has to be,
Well,
we'll see.
let's see the
We'll see.
application.
we'll see.
By the way, I think we have a copy of the decision for 1145, which was in our favor. That is, it sustained our position on that and denied the applicant's challenge. That's 1145 SMLC, which denied the leave to file a supplementary affirmation and exhibits. And it dismissed the claim against us for denying the variance.
There's any indication it's coming back to us?
They're gonna do something with the house.
Haven't heard anything.
I haven't heard anything.
Are we still having this discussion on the record?
Yeah,
Okay. just
no, it's
check.
still in the meeting because it's an open meeting, so. Yeah, okay,
On that note, let's close the
that being said, if we're discussing mitigation, we probably should close the meeting. Okay, I just want to mention that we do have the determination decision in there. So, as I said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved by Jay Dobson and seconded by Marilyn Foster and accepted by
Aye.
all. And it's still light out and beautiful days. Thank you.
This was a good decision, I think.
No, I like this one. This is a.
What other, are there
Well,
other,
this is
you know, when you
benefit.
consider that property, there's really not, I'm just going road by road in Sagaponic. There's really not another property that's a lot like that.
It really isn't.
Well, I don't know, I don't think so.
Like the one that you
Like
just.
the one we just saw.
No, the only other one that I really know of like that would be on Narrow Lane, which you guys did, grant variances for, where they took the old Domkowski.
Yeah, that's a long, no, I'm talking about ones that haven't been touched yet.
No, that's really,
Without buildings, you're talking about, right?
there aren't that many.
Well, no, like that are sort of like a farmstead that have like little buildings kind
Yeah,
of.
without buildings.
With
You know, I didn't want it on the record because I don't know how much I'm supposed to speak about a variance application you haven't heard yet.
Yeah, I understand,
So
I'm
like the
sorry.
Kaplan one, that one currently under Southampton, it's already at 42 feet above sea level. To maintain a roof deck, they wanna have a railing around it, and if they're gonna ask for 42 and a half feet. And it's gonna be a glass rail, that's why I said it's not obnoxious.
Yeah.
Unless you're,
And I mean, it's not like they're trying to shoot the moon, it's a described lot of property instead of all the other houses on the outside have setbacks equivalent to an R40, so they would have a 60-foot front yard setback. This, because it's a described lot, has an 80-foot front yard setback, and they're looking for like 73 on one of them and 60 on another. So the house already has a reduced rear yard by the 0.3 rule, and they're encumbered with wetlands, so their rear yard is really not changing. So honestly, they're really not shooting the moon on that property whatsoever.
the only other property that is like a farmstead, other than that one would be the ranch property. Main farmhouse and then various farms. And my own, but they were kind of like big Morton barns. I haven't seen much of those, hardly historic.
I'm not sure when Chris got off, like, whether he heard your discussion.
He heard the discussion about this.
Right, but I'm talking about thereafter.
Oh,
As he was gone.
yeah, well, I don't think there was anything material there. It was
Okay.
maybe
just
a
so-
little bit of chatter that maybe shouldn't have been on the record, I don't know, but to the extent that we were discussing the application and its implications and all, that's appropriately on the record, deliberations are open. I only intended to report the determination in 1145 on the record, not really being discussing it and what it might be altered, and whether they're coming back and all that stuff.
Did you see the article that Bill sent over? about town of East Hampton is gonna change their zoning code to take height lifts out of the purview of the ZBA, that it'll just simply go to the building department and they will allow for it, because someone made a statement that the state and federal laws supersede local zoning. So if you're supposed to by FEMA pop it up, they can't deny it.
But
And I
you're
don't
not
understand how
supposed to.
that can be true
I don't-
if the court ruled in the village's favor.
And I also don't agree that FEMA requires it to be raised.
Yeah.
FEMA requires new structures to comply,
Or if
but
it's a-
existing structures don't have to be
There
raised.
has
Or
to
that
be-
significant
there ha- like, that's
renovation. If you-
That is
if
a
you're
really
significantly-
crazy,
They're giving up,
like,
they're totally.
like, I
you know what?
can't even understand that.
Yes, I can understand it. They just got, the trustees just got fined $1 million out of their own pockets because of Truck Beach. And they got a $250,000 fine because they've been meddling with the airport.
That's right.
I think they just
That's what
decided,
happened.
we don't wanna touch anything.
But the height restriction on the beat, I
No,
mean, that
that's
seems like
insane.
that's like the golden cat,
That's
that's
insane.
crazy.
That's crazy. They're totally